Good afternoon and welcome to the Children and Family Affairs Committee. Thank you all for joining us today. And we are going to begin with a prayer by Representative Gant, and then we'll all stand for the pledge, please.
Thank you, Chair. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity that we have to serve you first and Tennesseans second. And we pray for wisdom and guidance as we debate these issues that you put before us, dear Lord, and just help us to do always what's right in our heart and vote our conscience. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Representatives Bricken. Here. Farmer. Here. Gant.
Here.
Garrett. Here. Harris. Jernigan. Yep. Powell. Stevens. Here. Chair Lady Littleton.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. We're going to do a little housekeeping. We have several bills that have been rolled. House Bill number 2, House Bill 1676 by Lambert is rolled 2 weeks. Number 3, 620 by Representative Warner is rolled 3 weeks. Number 4, 1931 by Representative Bolso, rolled 2 weeks. Number 5, House Bill 2003 by Chairman Farmer, rolled 1 week. Number 7, 1994 by Representative Stevens, rolled 1 week. So now we will get started. I guess I should have asked, are there any personal orders from the committee? Seeing none, we're going to get started with House Bill number 1, House Bill 1675 by Representative Slater. You are recognized. Properly motion second. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee members. House Bill 1675 accomplishes 3 things. First, it removes the requirement that participants in the relative caregiver program make no more than twice the federal poverty level. Secondly, it removes the requirement for a final custody order and allows any custody order. And lastly, it requires relative caregivers to cooperate with child support proceedings initiated by the Department of Human Services. And with that, Madam Chair, I stand for questions.
If you could, I had some visit from the department on this. Could you expound on why the goal of what this will hope to accomplish by passing this?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the question. Currently, this was passed. The relative caregiver program was passed in 22. It began this year in 23. Unfortunately, there's still children who find themselves without care. And one of the reasons is because of the limitation, the income limitation on relatives. And by eliminating that or removing the cap from that, then that should give us more opportunity to put children in the care of relatives.
Any other questions for Representative Slater? Question's been called. Without objection, we'll be voting for House Bill 1675 to move out to civil full. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Ayes have it. You move out to civil full.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee.
So next we have number 6, House Bill 1993 by Representative Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Properly motion and second, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This bill does 2 things. First, it allows a fiduciary, a conservator, or a guardian to sign their oath of office either in front of a notary public or with a statement that is in penalty of perjury versus having to be right there in front of the clerk. So that will make it easier. And also, it has a list of items that the fiduciary is going to agree that they understand when they sign that oath, such as I will not steal the person's money. I won't misuse their funds. I won't sell property before I ask the court for permission. I won't cut them off from the outside world. Just things that we would think are common sense, but people still do. And when they get caught, they go and say, well, I didn't know, I couldn't do that. So if these things are specifically listed in their oath, hopefully they will take it a little bit more seriously and be less tempted to commingle money and so forth like that. So.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Representative Stevens? Representative Powell, you're recognized.
And I appreciate that. A question, do they, and I understand they realize they can't do they understand the penalties, or is that explained what might happen if they violate that oath?
Representative Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The penalties are not specifically listed in here. They would probably be held in contempt of court, and the judge would be able to make a decision about what to do. If they violate it, I imagine they might be removed from the case as the conservator, but it does not have a plan prescribed in there that says the judge must do this if they violate it.
You're recognized.
Are you aware, have there been any cases that have been adjudicated over someone claiming ignorance to this?
You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This came to me from an attorney that works with a group of the Bar Association that handles conservatorships. And there's some counties where the conservators are not very trained on how to handle their duties. And they wanted to have a statewide program that trains conservators, but there was pushback from judges on that because it's already hard enough to find people to do that. And if they have to go and be trained. And so the thought was if these people have to read this oath and take these items a little more seriously, they won't come back to the court and say, I didn't know I couldn't do this or that if it's listed in this list.
Any other questions? Are we ready to vote? All those in favor of House Bill 1993, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. You move out to civil full. So that clears our calendar for today. So we are going to go out of session and hear from Second Look. So we are out of session. If y'all would come up and introduce yourselves and tell who you're with. I want to say a little bit about the Second Look. I'm not sure how many years, but I think I've served on it for, 6 years. And it's a hard committee to be on, a hard commission, but not that I've enjoyed it, but I have learned a lot. And I think we've had some good legislation come out of it. So we appreciate the job that you do. So we're looking forward to hearing from you. So just introduce yourselves and who you're with, please.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Richard Kennedy, and I have the great privilege to serve as the Executive Director of the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth. With me to my right, your left
I don't think you're.
Oh, sorry. With me to my right, your left is Kylie Graves, who is the Director of Data Communication and Policy with the Commission and also leads the work of the Second Look Commission. So we have a couple of things that we would like to accomplish and share with you guys today. The first is to provide a really brief overview of the work of the Commission on Children and Youth, to spend a little bit of time diving into some select areas of the 2023 State of the Child Report, specifically focusing on child poverty, child welfare, youth crime, some information from a youth in detention survey, and then with Kylie doing a bit of a deeper dive in the work of the Second Look Commission as well. So as always, when we have the opportunity to talk about the work of the Commission, just want to remind you guys what we do. So the Commission is an independent, nonpartisan state agency. Independent for us looks like the fact that we are governed by a 21-member commission. Each of the members are appointed by the governor, with the current chair of the commission being the Honorable Judge Rob Filial, who is the Hamilton County Juvenile Court Judge down in Chattanooga. The work of the commission really lives in kind of 4 different buckets. And so this is kind of how we go the day-to-day with doing our work. So the first bucket really is focused on data and insights, where we monitor various child and youth indicators to identify trends and areas of concern. We keep up with best practices for addressing issues affecting children and youth, and publish several reports throughout the course of the year. Collaboration is a second bucket, in that we realize that the only way we're going to have the best recommendations and the best solutions to the problems facing our children, youth, and families is by working with as many people who are doing this work as possible, learning from and making sure that we amplify as many voices in the work that we do. Third bucket is policy advocacy. So we again review data and outcomes, various policies related to children and youth, and we also have a variety of data snapshots, policy briefs, things like that, and are very specifically designed to be a resource for you all as you're thinking about your bills and policies that you want to enact, to be able to give you any extra information that you might need. And then the fourth bucket really is public awareness. And that I am a longtime state employee, and I very much believe that state government has a role to play in improving outcomes for children, youth, and families. But I really believe a lot of the magic and the work that happens in local communities and regions across the state. And so through our 9 regional councils, we spend a lot of time raising awareness around specific issues in certain parts of the state and really bringing people together to be able to solve those problems. So as I introduce Kylie to my right, Kylie is the Director of Data Communication and Policy. I was always told to hire people a whole lot smarter than you are, shut up and get out of their way. So I'm going to pass the vast majority of the presentation to Kylie, who is the primary author of the work, and will be here for any extra questions that you guys may have.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Richard said, a little bit of a confusing presentation because we are covering 2 commissions and 2 reports, but we'll try and make it as clear as possible. So we'll start briefly with the State of the Child report that's required by this Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth's Code. So we publish a comprehensive report on the status of children and youth in Tennessee every year and distribute that to the governor and the General Assembly. We'll start our presentation by looking at some of the trends regarding child poverty due to the fact that poverty is a factor in so many of the other topics addressed throughout the report. Tennessee has seen a steady decline in the percent of children living under the federal poverty line. So we've been trending downward over the decade. In 2022, we had 17.6 of our children under 18 living below the federal poverty line. Although higher than we'd like, it is closer to the national average than we've ever been before. For context, in 2022, the federal poverty line for a family of 3 was $23,030. And the national average at that point was 16.3%. Looking specifically at children under 5 are the age group most likely to experience poverty at the highest rates, and also are much more vulnerable to some of the negative impacts that can happen from living in poverty due to all of the rapid brain development that's happening during that time. Tennessee did see a really encouraging decline of under 5 poverty between 2019 and 2021, bringing us closer, almost in line to the national average than we've ever been before. While the following year, so from 21 to 22, we did see that slightly increase to 20%. We are still lower than we've been over the decade, but 1 in 5 of our children under 5 are under the federal poverty line. When we bring that up, a lot of people ask about how pandemic aid and some of the federal funds during the pandemic affected the poverty measure. The official poverty measure is very limited and doesn't include any non-cash, non-taxed benefits. So you wouldn't see a lot of the pandemic aid affecting the official poverty measure. Where you're going to see that is in the supplemental poverty measure, and that's the national rate that's on the screen there. So that's where you see the impact of some of that pandemic aid. We were given the opportunity to present this report to Education Administration Committee, and there we kind of focused on some of the education data and mental health, since that's what's before them. With you all, we're going to look at some of the child welfare numbers and some youth crime numbers as well. So looking at the numbers around victimization, in 2021, Tennessee had nearly 4,000 first-time abuse victims. This ranks us as the 4th lowest rate in the country in terms of number of victims. Across all victimization, first time and repeat, we rank 15th. So this indicates that Tennessee is experiencing higher rates of recurring abuse than other states are. In 2021, there was approximately 86 child abuse hotline referrals made per 1,000 Tennessee children. Of those, 48% of the hotline referrals were screened out. 55.5 out of every 1,000 Tennessee children received an investigation or alternative response following a hotline report. And after investigation, a little over 7,000 children had an abuse substantiation. So that's 4.7 out of every 1,000 children had an abuse substantiation. Looking at some of the trends around victimization, the rate of child victimization in Tennessee decreased from 6.2 per 1,000 in 2017 to 5.0 in 2021. It's still kind of waiting to be seen whether this was impacted by the pandemic or not. 17% of victims had received family preservation services within the last 5 years prior to the victimization. Just 3.2% of victims had been reunited with their families within the last 5 years. 1 in 4 victims were under 1 year old, so the majority are infants. Of infants with prenatal substance exposure, 98.7% had a plan of safe care, which is extremely encouraging. That puts us much higher than the national average in terms of plan of safe care. The national average is 70.4%. The most common perpetrator of victimization was one of the child's parents, with 62% of cases being one of the child's parents as the alleged perpetrator. There were 58 instances where the perpetrator was a foster parent or group home or residential facility staff, though a very, very small percent, 0.76%. It's concerning considering the previous abuse already endured by the children and the fact that these were meant to be safer places than the child's home. Looking at response time in 2021, the average time between the report of suspected maltreatment and the first face-to-face contact with the alleged victim or another person who can provide information on the allegation was 4.5 days. Between fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 23, Tennessee's investigation response time fell below the federal target in all 3 of the priorities. Looking at maltreatment and care, although it's still an extremely small percent of children in foster care, the number and percent of children maltreated in care has doubled from 2017 to 2021. Looking at foster care, 1 in 4 children entering foster care was re-entering after a prior episode. Of those, half were re-entering care after less than 12 months. Among children who were under 12 and entered foster care in fiscal year 21, 2.4 had their most recent placement in an institution. That's the highest prevalence of this in 5 years. During fiscal year 21, 14,558 children were served by Tennessee's foster system. And a review of TFAC's administrative data found that during the last 3 years, the 3 most common reasons for custody have been parental substance abuse, neglect for younger age groups, and then unavailable parent and neglect for older age groups. In fiscal year 21, 97% of kids in care had a monthly caseworker visit, which is extremely encouraging. And additionally, 89% of caseworker monthly visits occurred in the child's home or their current placement home. We've also seen improvement in services to prevent removal or reentry into care. So we've seen from the 2019 baseline to 22, we've gotten much higher, closer to the federal target there. Additionally, we've seen improvement in ensuring that all siblings are interviewed during an investigation, which is critical for safety and information gathering by the caseworker. Since 2018, the number of first-time foster youth experiencing 3 or more placements has steadily increased. This graph represents the number of placements a first-time foster youth has when they entered care. And so since it's cohort data, you would expect the earlier years to have a higher percentage because more time has elapsed since they've been in care. Of first-time kids entering the system in 2022, more than 1 in 3 had been in 3 or more placements by June 30th, 23. The 2023 data does only go for the first 6 months of the year, so that ends in June of 23. But among children entering in 23, more than 1 in 4 had been in 3 placements by June 30th. Looking at exits from care, more than half of exits from care in 2021 were to reunification. And then shortly followed after that was adoption at 23%. When we're looking at kids who are waiting for adoption in Tennessee, the majority of them have already had their parental rights terminated. For those who have had their rights terminated, the median time elapsed was about 10 months, and the average was 27.9 months. Looking at extension of foster care services, in fiscal year 23, 861 youth aged out of care. While the number aging out has been declining each year, this does represent an increase from the prior fiscal 22. Of those aging out, 86% were eligible for extension of foster care services. And among those eligible, half accepted. So in fiscal year 23, 369 youth accepted extension of foster care services, representing the second largest number of youth ever served, which is really great at getting them services, bridging that transition into adulthood. Looking over the years, the teal graph or the teal chart is going to be all abuse deaths investigated by DCS. The dark blue indicates those that were investigated and substantiated, and then the gray is those that are still pending. So looking over the years, we see about 40 to 50 substantiated abuse deaths each year. We don't have the full picture from 2020 to 23 because many deaths are still pending. Since we published, the final total of DCS investigated deaths in 2023 has been updated to 190. Looking at domestic violence, each year, the majority of Tennessee child victims of domestic violence are first-time victims, and that figure hovers in the 6,000s. However, of the 6,500 repeat victims of domestic violence since 2012, more than 1 in 6 had an order of protection in place that was violated, leading to the domestic violence. Moving on to youth crime, the numbers reflected here are from TBI and reflect what they capture as crimes. This is the broadest possible measure, so it doesn't require arrest or prosecution, just allegation to a law enforcement officer that a crime was committed by someone under 18. With this measure, there's always the chance that there's a crime incorrectly identified as being committed by someone under 18 when they were actually a young adult, 20s to 25. But looking over the decade, what we see is a steady decline in Tennessee's youth crime rate, dropping by a rate of 4.6 per 1,000 over the 10 years. 2020 was an anomaly across the board for youth behavior. We saw lower rates of substance use and other risk behaviors, and that's also reflected in the larger than usual drop in the crime rate. The light blue line represents the under 18 crime rate, and the dark blue represents the all ages crime rate. Although up from 2020, the rates in 21 and 22 get the state back, kind of matching the rest of our decade trend. Looking at crime rate change over the decade by county, between 2012 and 2022, Shelby, Davidson, and Hamilton all experienced a decline in the under 18 crime rate. Shelby and Davidson were both in the top 10 declines and saw a crime rate of 16.7 and 12.7 respectively drop. The largest decline was in Dyer County. Looking at specific types of crime, we see a similar pattern with crimes against persons, and we also see on the bottom one is crimes against property, where we see kind of a similar pattern as well, but not as big of a drop in 2020. Where we do see a slight increase and kind of deviate over the decade is in crimes against society, with an increase of 0.4 over the decade. The majority of crimes against society committed by those under 18 include drug and narcotics violations and weapons violations. So that's typically what we're talking about when we see crimes against society. Though we have seen an increase in weapons violations and use of firearms and crimes among young people, youth are much more likely to be the victim of a firearm crime than to perpetrate one. In 2012, there was 1,561 crimes involving a firearm where the offender was under 18. During that same period, there were 4,490 underage 18 victims of firearm crimes involving a child. Moving on to youth in detention, the Commission on Children and Youth conducts a survey each year of our youth in detention centers to gain more information about their life prior to detention and then their needs now. And so this is a voluntary anonymous survey among youth in detention centers that responded to the survey. Nearly 80% indicate that someone who lived with them had or maybe had been arrested, in jail, or in detention. 43% of youth state that they or someone they lived with needed or maybe needed help with mental health, drugs, or alcohol. When asked what would you change about school, court, detention, or probation to make it better, one youth answered, let them understand that detention doesn't help troubled kids, it makes them worse. Courts need better programs for serious troubled kids like me. We need more help than just getting thrown into a cell. More than half of youth, when asked what they needed more help with, reported that they needed help with high school or their GED or HiSET. We also asked youth about challenging experiences they had prior to entering detention. This included things like mental health challenges, failing a grade, not enough food, lights and water turned off, living in an unsafe neighborhood, or no adult help. Among youth who indicated that they faced at least one challenge, the average number of challenging experiences was 6.7. And so now we're going to transition into the Second Look Commission report, and then we'll have time for questions for both reports afterwards. So we're briefly going to go over the Second Look Commission, its membership, some of the 2022 case data, and then our findings and recommendations. So the Second Look Commission was created by Tennessee Code Annotated, and we shall review an appropriate sampling of cases involving a second or subsequent instance of severe child abuse in order to provide recommendations and findings to the General Assembly regarding whether or not severe abuse cases are handled in a manner that provides adequate protection to the children of the state. And so findings and recommendations address all stages of investigating and attempting to remedy severe child abuse. This includes reporting and investigating, returning to custody, court procedures, preventative measures, data collection, and representation in court. The Second Look Commission is a multidisciplinary team who volunteers their time to review these cases upon appointment. It includes TBI, TCCY, the CACs, DCS, AOC, members of the General Assembly, law enforcement representation, attorneys, a child abuse pediatrician, and nonprofit advocates. Looking at this, there were 599 individual children that experienced a second or subsequent instance of severe abuse in fiscal year 22. All of the cases that we receive, the fiscal year depends on the disposition date, which we'll get a little bit more into that when we look at the death data. We saw a 5.3 increase in victims from 2021. And then looking at both the first and second instance of abuse, 42% were drug-exposed infant or child. Looking specifically at the second or subsequent instance of severe abuse, nearly 70% were cases of sexual abuse. And then looking at abuse death data, the Second Look Commission reviews every instance of a substantiated abuse death with a prior DCS substantiation. We get these based on the date of disposition, like our other cases. However, abuse deaths typically take longer to process through. And so sometimes the date of death and date of disposition might fall into different fiscal years. The top graph is by date of disposition. So this year we reviewed 8 deaths, one of the highest numbers we've seen. However, the graph below shows those same cases based on date of death. Many of the 8 cases we reviewed this year actually occurred in fiscal year 20. And so it's still uncertain if the lower numbers in 21 and 22 reflect a true decline or if there are still death investigations pending. So the first topic we addressed is regarding safety of placement. Members expressed concerns with the safety conditions at several contracted providers. I won't read through each of these findings when we go through them, but just kind of hit the highlights. Findings related to this include, in one case, a foster home was initially approved for 2 placements, yet had 6 children placed there. Members noted concern for why this exception was made and why the policy was not followed. Members noted the opportunity for more in-depth evaluation of foster homes when allegations of abuse or inappropriate discipline arise. In one abuse death instance, members noted that the children were the foster parents' first placement and were a complex placement for the first time. There was questions about what resources, services, and supports were provided to the foster parents. Members noted that the description of bruising appeared to resemble a slap mark, not matching the explanation for the marks given by the foster parents. Members were concerned with allegations of abuse at a residential treatment center. In one case, there was staff sexual abuse at a facility. Allegations of contraband being provided by staff at a facility did not result in law enforcement investigation or criminal charges. Additionally, in some cases, visitation or custody was granted to caregivers who had unresolved criminal charges or substantiations, placing the children at risk of harm. Members questioned why a grandmother had supervised visitation with a child when she had pending criminal charges and a severe abuse substantiation by DCS. Additionally, in another case, a mother had been substantiated and charged with severe abuse, yet the children were returned to her while she was on probation for these charges. In several cases, members noted that custody determinations or relative care placements allowed contact with caregivers that presented an ongoing risk to the child's safety or stability. In one instance, the child was allowed to remain in the home of someone who resided with a person convicted of sexual offenses against a child and was a violent sex offender. Recommendations around safety of placements. The commission recommends to establish in Department of Children's Service policy that if an SIU investigation leads to the substantiation of an abuse death or near death at a licensed provider, the Office of Child Welfare Licensing and Office of Continual Quality Improvement will conduct a review of the provider's practices to ensure compliance. Upon completion of the review will be provided to the Commissioner of the Department of Children's Services. Additionally, members noted that first-time foster parents are experiencing a significant change and may need additional support. Currently, all new placements, regardless of the foster parent's tenure, are to receive a caseworker visit within 3 days. New foster parents will also receive a call and visit with a foster care support or foster parent support worker and be connected with a foster parent mentor. Considering the challenges that may arise as a first-time foster parent, members recommended requiring more frequent in-home caseworker visits for both DCS foster homes and third-party providers to ease the transition over the first 3 months as a foster parent. Also recommended the allegations of contraband being provided to staff by staff to children at residential facilities should be investigated by law enforcement. And then while custody is determined through the court and the judges make that determination, they do so based on the information provided to them through the various parties. So ensuring that the court has all the available information to make the best decision possible regarding custody and visitation is critical. Looking specifically at investigations, in several cases, members found opportunities for a more thorough investigation into the alleged abuse. In one case, it appears that the former foster mother of the alleged perpetrator may have babysat the alleged child victim shortly before the child's death. It does not appear that the former foster mother was contacted as a part of an investigation into the death of the child. During the course of an investigation, a child disclosed sexual advances and grooming by their stepfather, but this disclosure was not followed up on. A year later, when the child disclosed again, there was an investigation resulting in him being substantiated by the department and charged criminally. Members additionally had concerns that a hotline call alleging methamphetamine use and concerns of postpartum depression with psychotic features was screened in as a P2 assessment case. In several of the abuse death cases, members noted the need for additional autopsies and additional communication regarding autopsies and the challenges that arise when that doesn't happen. Investigators were unable to get a preliminary autopsy finding in one case. If law enforcement had known that smothering could have been a potential cause of death, they may have approached the investigation differently. In one abuse death case, the autopsy took 3.5 years. Members noted significant autopsy delays appeared to be regional or location specific. And so DCS has established a system to reach out to the medical examiner's office in event of a delay. Regarding investigations, our recommendations are ensure that medical examiners understand the importance of a preliminary autopsy finding and the benefits that it provides to the investigation process. And then additionally recommending to evaluate the current CPS caseloads to determine the number of workers with over 20 open cases and examine if the policy of determining caseloads by a regional monthly average allows caseworkers enough time and capacity to conduct their investigations to the best of their abilities. In addition, while CPS, foster care, juvenile justice, family support services, and family crisis intervention caseworkers are counted or to have no more than a regional monthly average of 20 cases. CPS workers' cases are counted by the family, while all others are counted by the child. Considering this, DCS should evaluate if the number of cases for CPS workers should be decreased. Additionally, members noted concerns with consistency regarding the availability of forensic interview recordings. There was also question if DCS ever partners with law enforcement to search through cell phones or other devices for potentially sexually explicit materials or communication. Members expressed a significant need for additional training on the complexities of abuse, particularly sexual abuse among SIPP partners. Members expressed concerns with SIPP members participating and making determinations on substantiations without adequate training on abuse, and also additional training for detectives on the complexity of sexual abuse cases and disclosures from children. Recommendations for this: the CACs have begun using a new digital evidence software that we hope will make forensic interviews more accessible for parties that need access while also maintaining their security and privacy. And then also recommended that the Office of General Counsel should establish a policy on when and how investigators can partner with law enforcement to extract evidence from phones, and then also continue to recommend additional training for SIPIT partners. Looking at no contact orders and medical challenges, in multiple cases reviewed by the commission, an existing no contact order was violated and placed the child in danger. In one case, the alleged perpetrator was substantiated for a near-death case with the alleged child victim. A no contact order between those two was court ordered. The order was violated and then led to the abuse death of the child. Members have reviewed several cases where mothers are not appropriately protective of their daughters who've been sexually abused, even violating court orders. This is particularly common when the alleged perpetrator is their spouse, boyfriend, or paramour. Members also found that when law enforcement or Department of Children's Services are addressing a situation, they're often not aware of or able to easily access information regarding existing no contact orders between the caregiver and child. Alleged child victim presented to a pediatrician's office once for being difficult to arouse or potential sedation, and then once again for bruising on their ear. Both of these situations are extremely concerning for abuse, but do not appear to have been reported by the medical professional. And then members noted that although a cause of death was found to be undetermined, pediatricians treating the child's injuries reiterated that while that level of injury could have been caused by an adult of that size falling, it was not possible for that to occur by a child of that size falling. Looking at recommendations, for many years, Second Look has noted violations of no contact orders placing children in danger. Commission continues to reiterate the importance of courts clearly explaining, orally and written word, the scope and duration of no contact orders, and also recommend reiterating that the no contact order does not expire at the conclusion of the Department of Children's Services cases. Newly established law establishes a criminal offense specific to the violation of a no contact order by a kinship foster placement. Since this newly passed legislation, ensuring that kinship foster placements are aware of the consequences if they knowingly allow the parent to violate a no contact order should be a high priority during the onboarding process. And the Second Look also recommended the creation of a database of no contact orders from both general sessions and juvenile court to be accessed by law enforcement and DCS investigators. Also, recommendations around the typical injuries and signs associated with child abuse should be provided to all professionals working in medical facilities, particularly pediatricians' offices. And then communication and mutual understanding between medical examiners and medical providers is critical in determining an appropriate cause of death. And then finally, looking at services, members found wraparound services provided to families during challenging times to be a strength and potentially mitigated further abuse from occurring. In one case, when the child was placed with another caregiver following the death of the sibling, the caregiver was given extensive family support services to ease the transition. Members noted this as a strength that likely prevented further challenges. Members were also encouraged that the alleged child victim was receiving intensive in-home services, considering the trauma that they had experienced. And also noted in one case that when the mother had access to support from a multi-agency collaboration, things seemed to be going really well for the family. Members felt parties in several cases would have benefited from additional services, and members noted one of the greatest challenges across the cases reviewed is a lack of available and appropriate services across the state. And then finally, members have often noted the importance of engaging fathers in the custody process and noted that paternal extended family can be an important potential placement or support system. And then final recommendations there. Members were encouraged by the improvements seen when wraparound support services were provided to caregivers. Members would like to see these expanded with a focus on evaluating the best way to safely and successfully transition caregivers out of services. Access to appropriate services continues to be a need for children in the child welfare system. Members recommended that the General Assembly commission a study to aggregate and analyze the existing reports regarding the service needs and availability across the state with input from stakeholders. And then additionally, the AOC develops bench cards each year. These cards are provided to the courts and outline the services and providers available in the community. Although these are designed to be a service and support for the court, they are publicly available and can be a resource for others in the community looking for information regarding service availability. And so that wraps up both reports. I'm happy to answer any questions y'all might have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For the report. It's very informative, but can we go back like the dates that even this past year that these recommendations or some of them come from, they weren't all in 23 or even 22. Some of them go back a little ways, don't they?
Yeah, so this year we reviewed cases that received a disposition in fiscal year 22. And so, like I mentioned, a lot of times the date of disposition and date of abuse fall in the same fiscal year. However, with some of the autopsy delays that we're seeing and some of the more complex long cases, sometimes those can fall into another fiscal year. I would say the majority of non-death cases that we reviewed occurred in fiscal 22. The majority of the deaths we reviewed occurred in fiscal 20.
That's fair. Thank you for
Yeah,
that.
of course.
And some of those have been addressed too,
Mhm.
a few of them, and we are working on some more of them this year as well. So I think I see a lot of bills coming through that are addressing a lot of this. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. And I had a couple of questions. The re-entry for the foster care,
Mhm.
especially when there's 2 or 3 re-entries from foster children. What is the cause of that, and what damage does that do to the child?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a challenge. I think, there are familial ties that are really strong. And so, kids are bonded to their caregiver. But, any sort of placement disruption, whether that be foster care movements going back and forth between the homes, is going to make things unstable and uncertain for kids. And depending on where those placements are, they might be moving cities, they might be moving counties, depending on where they're in foster care versus where they're back into their caregiver's home.
So you're saying that we know that it definitely discourages the child, and I think it hinders them in their education and their mental health as well. The more times they change around, the more damage it does to the
Yeah.
child.
And so I think that's where we saw that improvement in services aimed at preventing youth from reentering care. Where is it? Yeah. We've seen improvement in services provided in home to prevent youth from re-entering or to prevent removal in the first place. And so those kind of services, transitioning a kid back to their parents with the appropriate services and support, is good.
So one more, then I know there are going to be a lot of questions.
Yeah.
The extension of foster care, just kind of touch on that briefly, because I'm really proud that we have done that. So
Yeah,
please.
absolutely. Do you want to talk about extension?
So, so one of the responsibilities that we have at the Commission on Children and Youth is to coordinate a partnership with our friends and colleagues at the Department of Children's Services to do some work that's known as the Youth Transitions Advisory Council. And so through some federal dollars and some additional state dollars, something that's known as Chafee funding really provides additional support and services for those young people who are aging out of the foster care system and transitioning to adulthood. There are education benefits, there are some financial benefits that come along with that. And so for several of the young folks who are aging out of the foster care system, when they're aged out, they're done, they're finished, they don't want to have anything else to do with the department. But like most of you and myself included, when I was 18, I was in no shape, form, or fashion prepared to be an adult all by myself. And so I think that the department's really done stellar work of raising awareness about the benefits of participating in those extension of foster care services. I'm also really excited that in this space as well, through the Youth Transitions Advisory Council report last year, the Governor's Office of Faith-Based Initiatives saw that data and have convened faith leaders, nonprofit partners, others together to really look at how we can continue in a collaborative way to wrap supports and services around those young folks who are aging to help them be successful.
Thank you. Representative Gant, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Lady. Earlier in your earlier part of your presentation, you had mentioned the youth crime rate
Yeah, absolutely.
across the state. And I saw where you had Shelby County was on the decline.
Mhm.
And can you tell me what crimes you're referring to in that report?
Yeah, absolutely. So for Shelby County, the overall under 18 crime rate has declined. The crime rate against persons has declined. The crime rate against property has declined. However, the crimes against society has increased, and that's largely driven by weapons violations in Shelby County.
Okay.
Representative
Okay.
Kent.
Yeah. And if I could, Madam Chair, I have another question.
Yeah, absolutely.
You had mentioned the faith-based just now, and I'm a firm believer in this society that we find ourselves in that government is not the fix to the problem most times, but in the faith sector, these nonprofits that are on the front lines of these dealing with these situations, do you feel like those nonprofits are much more effective than a government program can try to fix that problem, as far as where we're putting our dollars from the state?
Yes, sir. That's a really good question. So as I said earlier, I believe that government has an incredibly important role to play in improving outcomes. Like you, I don't believe that it's the magic answer to every problem that our communities face. I have a great amount of faith in the work that the nonprofit organizations across the state are doing. Like with any entity, funding is always a challenge for some of our nonprofits. But to your point with the nonprofits and the success, I truly believe the magic of helping kids and families happens at that community level. It happens at that regional level where the folks who are doing that work understand what the strengths, the opportunities, the relationships are in those communities. And so I definitely think that there is a continued need for a strong public-private partnership with funding being invested in nonprofits as well. Now, in saying that, there are some roles and responsibilities that I think government should continue to do that should not happen with a nonprofit. You know, an example would be child abuse investigations and things like that.
Okay. One follow-up
Go
question.
ahead.
So what you're saying is financially we can help these nonprofits. So thinking kind of as we talk out loud here, how can we better support these nonprofits? Would it be through creation of grant programs that will provide more dollars for these nonprofits?
Right. So there are some just Richard opinions, but what I will tell you is there's a relatively new organization that's in Tennessee. It's an association of nonprofits. It's a statewide association, and they have issued and released kind of their public policy agenda around how they believe that they can better partner with government to help solve problems. Some of those have to do, some of the recommendations have to do with the way that reporting requirements for grants or grants processes or things like that. So I'm happy to be able to get you that information so you can hear it directly from them. I think that an example that I think works really well that we're directly involved with at the Commission on Children and Youth is that there are nonprofits across the state that are known as CASAs, Court-Appointed Special Advocate Programs. And so what those organizations do are they match volunteers with highly trained volunteers with young folks who are involved in the child welfare system to really be that young person's voice as they go through the court proceedings. And so with that, you guys allocate, it used to be $22,000. It's now $45,000. I'm gonna have to double check myself, $45,000 per county that has a CASA program. We know that $45,000 is not enough to completely operate the program, but it really is that seed money that allows them to build on that and to be able to solicit additional grant opportunities or community giving to be able to help them do the work that they're doing. So yes, always, I think grant opportunities are great. I think any direct allocations that you guys deemed appropriate to certain nonprofits, I think are great. You guys have been very generous with our friends at the Children's Advocacy Centers with some dollars as well. And I have the great privilege to serve on kind of an oversight committee that Director Warner put together with that. So I think you're right on track with really being able to help the nonprofit communities be able to do more than what they're already doing.
Okay. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Bricken, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. I got kind of several questions, some very quick. And the first, a lot of your reports cited statistics per 1,000 children.
Mhm.
And so sometimes that's a good way of putting it out, but it doesn't say how many children. So roughly, how many children are there in Tennessee, so that if it's 5% per 1,000, we can translate that to numbers?
Yeah, I think in the 22, it was 1,567 or so thousand.
Okay.
About like a little over 1.5 million children under 18 in Tennessee.
I guess and I was trying to look at your website while this report was
Yeah,
up,
absolutely.
and I think most of this report's on your website. But
Yes,
is
the
that
entire. Mhm.
all right?
Both
Were all of the
reports.
charts and everything on your website?
Yes.
Okay. I guess the more serious question I have, of all the findings and recommendations on the report,
Mhm.
and they all sound extremely serious to me.
Mhm.
I wonder, should they not be somehow prioritized in ranking of serious findings and serious recommendations? And then where is the actionable steps in solving those recommendations, or who is assigned to solving it, and where does it go, rather than just having a nice report?
Mhm.
Until it becomes an actionable item, it just seems it's out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where does those findings, recommendations get identified as actual items, and we can monitor or help be certain that they're executed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good question. I think in terms of the first question around prioritization, one of the strengths and challenges of the Second Look Commission is that we have a lot of different professionals who are very passionate about their side of it. And so I think it would be hard for us to prioritize in terms of our medical professional is going to see the medical recommendations and say, that should be number one. Some of the people involved in the court are going to see those and say that should be number one. We do meet to narrow down our recommendations, so we filter out some of them, but I think it is kind of hard to prioritize. And then in terms of actionable items, that's something we're talking about with the we're going through the audit process right now with the comptroller's office. And one of the things with the Second Look Commission is that we do make recommendations. We don't have any enforcement authority to require those recommendations to happen. Currently, how it happens, we have really great legislative members on the committee. And so typically, Representative Littleton will carry quite a few bills related to the recommendations. From my understanding, she has a meeting with DCS to kind of establish what needs to be addressed through legislation and what needs to be addressed just through policy change. But it is something that we're discussing in statute. We don't have any enforcement mechanism for our recommendations.
But it seems like the recommendations and findings should identify the appropriate agency or legislation to address that issue, and it should be in the report.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good idea.
And then if it's a recommendation to an agency, I think that agency is obligated to prepare a written response to y'all to incorporate in so that we and the public can see, how hopefully some of these issues are being worked on and resolved.
I think that's actually, we're meeting next week, and one of the things we were going to talk about is what's our follow-up mechanism for these recommendations? When it's done through policy change, how are we following up to make sure that that's actually enacted? So hopefully that's something we'll be moving towards.
Thank you.
Representative Powell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess a question is a lot of data to digest, and I really appreciate the thoroughness of this. But you're the experts, the ones who put this together. If you were to kind of highlight a couple key statistics, both positive, we're headed in the right direction as a state, and some things that are that we should really be concerned about. And I don't want to, clearly if it impacts you or your profession or your family or someone it's going to be more important. So I get, how we prioritize things. But just if you could, given your professional opinion of having compiled this report, some positive directions and some things we need to look out for?
Yeah, I think some of the things that come to mind actually weren't in this presentation, but in the full report. I think the trends that we're seeing with the federal poverty line are really encouraging. However, the federal poverty line is extremely low. So there's still many families who are above federal poverty line and are still having trouble meeting financial means. I think from that, we saw a lot of improvement in household stability, and parents feeling less stressed and less anxious when they had access to things like the child tax credit, like free lunch. Those were extremely effective. So I think looking at that, I think some of the trends that we're seeing around mental health, particularly adolescent girls' mental health, is extremely shocking and really concerning. Some of the trends that we're seeing with suicidal ideation continuing to go up each year, and suicide attempts also following that. I think we're seeing more improvement, like we talked about, with caseworker visitation, with making sure we're talking to everyone involved in the case, trying to get services in home before kids have to be removed is really important. Additionally, in the report, we talk about childcare continues to be a huge challenge for Tennessee families. Any thoughts from you?
Yeah, so I would agree completely. And when you asked that question, I was turning to the economic section of the report. I think the thing that I'm proudest of that's happening is really the closing of the gap with a poverty level. We know that family income impacts so much that has to do with children's development over the course of time. So I definitely agree with that. I would second mental health as well. Every table that we have an opportunity to have a seat at, we'll hear folks talk about the mental health challenges and needs, and our you guys, the governor, our friends at the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services are doing just incredible work, but there just continues to be more need with that. I think that the opportunity we have there as well, and I hear Commissioner Williams say this often, is that we can talk about money, we can talk about services, but we have to keep workforce development in mind as we're having those conversations as well.
Just a follow-up question, and not really a question, just a comment, but I certainly appreciate that. It does concern me, mental health, specifically of young girls in our state, because we know that these children who have these, they're dealing with different mental health issues. Certainly, this is a key developmental time period. And those traumas and other things they can suffer can be with them for the rest of their lives. So hopefully, as a state, we'll continue to do things to support the advancement of mental health care, treatment, prevention all around. So thank you for that, and I appreciate your feedback. I'll dig more into those specific points. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of other things.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think the no contact, I think that is going to help if, they know that they're going to be punished a little bit if they give the child back to someone that they're not supposed to. But I think as long as the drugs are here, we're not going to see much of a decline until we do something about the drugs, because we know that the majority of all of these children come from drug-exposed homes or are born with drugs in their system.
Yeah, I think that's why we were so encouraged with the how much higher we are with the plan of safe care than the national rate. Establishing a plan of safe care when the infant's in the hospital is really critical to mitigating some of the negative impacts of substance exposure.
And definitely the home that they go home to as well. And the decline in the victims, are they just not being reported now, or?
That's kind of the
What's that?
question that we're waiting to see. We know, over the pandemic that kids were not in front of the most common reporters. And so that's kind of a waiting and see. There's, the unfun thing with some of these numbers is that there's a delay to them. And so kind of waiting to see over the last several years, kind of pre-pandemic, it fluctuated a lot. So there wasn't a steady up or down. It kind of jumped. And so we're waiting to see if the 2 years of decline are due to kids not being in front of the people most likely to report, or if it represents an actual decline.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, we will go. Thank y'all very much for being
Thank you.
here.
Thank
We
you.
will go back into session. We are adjourned.